What if a machine could start nuclear war even after every human leader was dead? During the Cold War, the Soviet Union built exactly that. Hidden beneath the mountains of Russia was a system designed to launch nuclear war, even if every human leader is already dead. This system was called Perimeter. The soldiers who knew about it had another name for it: the dead hand. The idea was both simple and a little terrifying. So, the premise is, if the Soviet Union died, the dead hand of the state would twitch with one last spasm right onto the button. Sensors would listen for nuclear explosions, and if they heard them, well, a rocket would launch into the sky carrying one message: fire everything. For nearly half a century, the world has lived under the shadow of nuclear war.
I walk through silence, thick and cold, where shadows drift and time grows old. No voice to call, no path to take, just fog and fear with every ache. Souls in the fog.
The United States and the Soviet Union both built arsenals capable of destroying civilization multiple times over. The strategy that kept both sides from pressing the button was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. If one side launches nuclear weapons, the other side responds. Both nations will be obliterated, along with probably a whole lot of other people due to the fallout. The Soviet military planners feared something even worse than nuclear war. They feared what was called a decapitation strike, which is a sudden nuclear attack designed to destroy the Soviet leadership before retaliation could even be ordered. So if Moscow was wiped out, if communication networks were destroyed, the Soviet Union might not be able to launch its nuclear weapons at all. Good for everybody, really. But if that happened, deterrence would fail. This fear wasn't just theoretical. Several times during the Cold War, the world had already come terrifyingly close to nuclear war. October 24th, 1960. At the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, Soviet engineers were preparing the R-16 intercontinental ballistic missile for launch. The missile sat towering over the launch pad filled with highly toxic and extremely volatile fuel. Overseeing preparations was Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, personally pushing for speed in the program over safety. As technicians scrambled to fix electrical faults, something went terribly, terribly wrong. A short circuit ignited the second stage engine while workers were still in close proximity. The missile erupted in a ball of fire and fuel and completely consumed the launch pad. Dozens of engineers and officers were killed instantly. Some were incinerated where they stood, others ran through the flames before they collapsed. Estimates range from between 60 to over 120 fatalities, including Marshal Nedelin himself. And the Soviet government immediately covered up the disaster, which they were always well known for doing back then. You never got real numbers, you never got an honest anything out of the Soviet government. Their families were told that their loved ones died in a plane crash. The truth remained secret for absolutely decades. It was a harsh lesson on the fragility and the danger of these nuclear missile programs, and the foreshadowing of why Soviets feared losing command during a crisis. Forward to October 27th, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this has pushed the United States and the Soviet Union right to the edge. They're button heads pretty hard at this point. A Soviet submarine, B-59, hid beneath the waters off of Cuba. Inside, the crew carried a weapon that Americans didn't know existed: a nuclear torpedo. The submarine had been underwater for days. The air inside grew hot and stale. Carbon dioxide levels climbed quite dangerously. Then the U.S. Navy began dropping practice depth charges to force the submarine to surface. Now, inside B-59, panic spread. Captain Valentin Savitsky believed war had already begun. He prepared to launch the nuclear torpedo, and 2 senior officers approved. The third officer, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. Arkhipov argued the depth charges were warning signals, not a full-scale attack. And he convinced the captain to surface instead. This is an instance where one man's courage prevented nuclear catastrophe. And the Soviets weren't the kind of people he wanted to say no to. If Arkhipov had agreed, the Cuban Missile Crisis could have become World War III in an instant. November 9th, 1979, inside NORAD, radar screens start flashing. Hundreds of incoming missiles. Alarm sirens screamed, strategic bomb crews were placed on high alert, and missile crews prepared to launch. In Washington, the National Security Advisor was briefed on what appeared to be a Soviet first strike. For several tense minutes, the United States believed that nuclear war had begun. The ground radar and the satellites would eventually report nothing. A technician had accidentally loaded a training simulation tape into the live warning system. Don't know how you do that as an accident, but we'll go with that. For minutes, humanity teetered right next to the brink of annihilation, all because someone trained to do a job failed. A simple, idiot mistake that could have ended all of us. June 3rd, 1980. Another false alarm shook the United States. So the early warning system suddenly reported that 2,200 incoming Soviet missiles were on the way. Bomber crews were ready. Missile crews waited for launch orders. Radar systems reported nothing. Investigators discovered a tiny, defective computer chip worth less than $1. Yet for several minutes, it had nearly triggered nuclear war. Can we really depend on technology to keep us safe in these instances when it doesn't get maintained properly? So September 26, 1983 rolls around, and Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was on duty in the Serpukhov 15 bunker. A satellite had detected 5 incoming U.S. nuclear missiles. A protocol demanded immediate report, but Petrov hesitated. The reason for his hesitation was that he thought that a real U.S. strike would launch hundreds of missiles, not just 5. So for 20 minutes, he waited. Nothing appeared. Sunlight reflecting off of high clouds had fooled the satellites. And Petrov's gut instinct saved the world. Yet again, another Russian does the job of saving the world. From Russian systems. November 1983. Able Archer 83 simulated NATO nuclear responses. New communications protocols and realistic nuclear response procedures made the exercise unusually lifelike. So Soviet intelligence had interpreted it as a possible cover for a first strike. So Soviet forces were put on high alert. Nuclear aircraft were prepared. For days, Moscow feared an imminent attack. It was the closest that the Soviet Union may have come to launching a preemptive nuclear strike since 1962. Now, on January 25th, 1995, Norwegian scientists launched a research rocket to study the Northern Lights. The rocket resembled a submarine-launched ballistic missile on Russian radar. That's probably a design flaw, just a small one. Nothing big there. So, Russian President Boris Yeltsin was handed the nuclear football. And for minutes, Russia debated whether a nuclear response was necessary. Eventually, the rocket's harmless trajectory was confirmed. And this remained the only time that's ever been known that Russia actually activated their nuclear football over a potential attack. January 24th, 1961, a B-52 carrying 2 nuclear bombs broke apart over North Carolina. One bomb nearly detonated. 3 of 4 of its safety mechanisms had failed. Only a single low-voltage switch prevented a catastrophic detonation that could have nuked America if not for that one extra safety measure. On January 21st, 1968, a B-52 carrying 4 nuclear bombs caught fire over Greenland. The crew attempted an emergency landing at Thule Air Force Base, and the bomber crashed, scattering radioactive material across the ice. None of the bombs detonated, but the risk was catastrophic. And it's the incidents like these that terrified the Soviet planners. Human error, technical glitches, and misinterpretation could all cause nuclear war. So they asked a terrifying question. What if a nuclear attack killed the leadership before orders could be given? Well, the answer to that question was the perimeter system. The dead hand. The sensors across the Soviet Union monitored for nuclear detonation, seismic shock waves, radiation spikes, sudden pressure changes, loss of communication. If the system detected a strike and confirmed leadership was unresponsive, it would automatically launch special command missiles. These missiles didn't carry the nuclear warheads. They acted as airborne radio transmitters, broadcasting nuclear launch commands to every operational nuclear silo. Even if the Soviet Union was obliterated, the nuclear retaliation was guaranteed to occur. The system operated from deep underground bunkers, some believe buried underneath the Ural Mountains. Now, these bunkers were heavily fortified, far from your conventional military command centers. These places were designed to survive nuclear attacks and remain operational for weeks, if not months. The command missiles themselves were also quite unusual. They were modified ballistic rockets not intended to strike a target. Instead, they carried long-range communication payloads transmitting activation signals to every missile silo within the range. In essence, the system had its own independent airborne command network, a machine built to keep the nuclear arsenal fully operational, even if humans were dead. The dead hand was so secretive that many of the senior Soviet officials reportedly had no knowledge of its existence. Some negotiators in nuclear treaties were unaware that the system had been built. Even during some of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War, the system could have been activated automatically, without a single human decision. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the fate of Dead Hand remains uncertain. In 2011, a former commander of Russia's strategic missile forces confirmed that the system does still exist. Whether it's operational, whether it's been upgraded, or whether it's dormant, we don't know. We just know that its capabilities still remain classified, but it still exists. Somewhere inside Russia's military command infrastructure, a machine built during the Cold War may still be waiting. Just waiting for the signals that the country has been destroyed. Waiting to launch their nuclear weapons in retaliation. This system was designed to strike back, even in death. This has been the story of the Soviet Union's dead hand system called Perimeter, the doomsday machine built to fight a war after the world had already ended. So I hope you liked this one. This was some interesting research here. I didn't really expect a lot of the nuclear events. I didn't realize we'd had so many near misses over the years. It was rather eye-opening to see how often and to see what caused these failures. So many of them were often simple equipment failures, just a small piece of something, just a little something that didn't go right. And it nearly cost humanity potentially thousands, if not millions of lives. I do wonder myself what the American version of the dead hand is. Because if you know the Russians have one, then you can be certain America has one too, whether we talk about it or not. So, hopefully, given everything going on, we can avoid nuclear war and nuclear incidents, which they do seem to be trying to cause. Hopefully, we can do better as a people and a species.